Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Blake Bettner, and today I'm joined by Zach Kazan. Zach, hello, how are you?
Hey, Blake, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm excellent. It's a little rainy here in New York, but surviving. We are also
Cooler weather in New Hampshire today.
It's turning a corner. I think maybe not so much for our guests. I don't know. He's out in California. We are thrilled to welcome Mr. Gabe Reilly. Gabe, welcome to the podcast.
Gentlemen, hey, thank you for having me.
It's our pleasure. So you are out. Are you in the Bay Area? Are you in Southern California?
I'm in Southern California. Yeah, I used to be in the Bay Area for many years.
Okay.
And then about a year or so ago, moved down to the LA area.
Oh, okay. You happy with that?
Much better weather.
Yeah, much.
I don't know. You know, it's funny. I'm a native New Yorker. Grew up in New York City, and then I lived in San Francisco and Oakland for about 15 years. And so, I was like genetically predisposed, and also just in terms of nurture predisposed to hate Southern California and LA.
Yeah.
And then, finally, my wife spent some time growing up down here, and I after many years of pressure, I sort of acquiesced and gave in. And now I'm like, why didn't I move here sooner?
Yeah, it's nice down there. Although I will say this time of year, well, September in general is a very lovely time of year in San Francisco. But by and large, not a bad move. So for listeners that might not know, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. You are part of a group of collectors, watch collectors called Collective. And you have a new release that we're going to talk about today. But tell us who you are and what Collective is.
Cool. Yeah. So I co-founded Collective along with Asher Rapkin about 3 years ago, and it's a group of collectors. It was originally started. We began Collective geographically, at least, in the San Francisco Bay Area. So a lot of folks think about us as a Bay Area or Northern California, Silicon Valley collectors group. We're not. We have members now all over the world. Most of our members are in California, but we've got folks all over the world. In fact, as part of the launch we're going to talk about today, we're opening our second sort of hub. So outside the US, we're opening another hub in the UK, in London in particular, to grow the community there. But Collective is a collectors group. It's different from others kind of in two ways. The most distinct thing about it is the focus on collaborative watches and timepieces. So we are about to launch our fifth piece, or by the time this comes out, we'll have launched our fifth collaborative watch with IWC. And the collaborative watches are the glue that connects our community together. So every collective member owns at least one of our watches. And then the watches kind of become this thing that connects everyone in the group to one another, which is kind of interesting. And then in terms of the group itself, unlike other watch groups, it is a private group, and it's not meant to be exclusive. It's meant to be intimate. And so the way you become a member of Collective is when we launch a new piece. If you're interested in purchasing it, you fill out an application on our website. It sounds lame to ask people to fill out an application to purchase something from you. We could talk about why we do that, but we try to make it as painless as possible. Basically, we're just looking for people who want to join with the best of intentions, and who will also bring diversity to the group, diversity of interest and perspective. And so it's a collectors group. It's a intimate or private collectors group. It's not public like some others. There's a role for public groups. I'm a member of several. And then we focus on collaborative pieces, and that's kind of the thing that probably makes us most distinct.
Sure. So to be clear, this is not a private club of Silicon Valley millionaires. Okay.
No. Far from it.
Okay, sure. So we'll talk more about it. Before we get too far, though, let's take a step back. We can do a wrist check. Gabe, what are you wearing? What do you got on your wrist?
Cool. Well, I'm wearing a watch that I owe to Worn and Wound. It's the Damasco DC80. Nice. It's a center minutes chronograph. And Damasco is a brand, like I said, I discovered through you guys at the Wind Up Watch Fair in San Francisco. It's the first one, so that must have been, gosh, two or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And I'll never get the image of the setup that the guys from Damasco had at their table, that their watches laid out, and they were talking about their ice-hardened cases. And one of the family members, one of the owners of Damasco, was there with like a stainless steel pen, and he was just hacking at the case, like demonstrating just how hard and impervious to scratching the ice hardened case was. And that sort of caught my attention and made me really curious about the brand and the things that they do. And then of course you guys produced I think a couple of documentary videos on Damasco and the manufacturer. And my gosh, why everyone isn't singing about Damasco and shouting about them from the top of the roofs is beyond me. These guys make an incredible watch and have some incredible technology, and just a very distinctly German take on watchmaking. So thank you guys for turning me on to Damasco.
Yeah, no, they do some really awesome stuff there, and very much kind of under the radar type stuff too, which is great. I know we're all big fans here. Zach Kazan, what are you wearing? You got a Damasco on?
No, not wearing a Damasco today. I'm wearing my Grand Seiko SPGH 271. Today.
Okay, this is the summer watch.
Yeah, it's the summer dial. It's a green texture dial. I put it on a gray suede strap.
Okay.
Recently, feels like kind of like the right choice for fall.
Yeah.
So yeah, I wear this watch all the time.
Oh, very cool. Well, I knew that Gabe was coming on today, so I put on my IWC 3706. It's on a grayish, I think that's what they call it. It's somewhere between gray and beige. NATO strap. Our friends over at Crown and Buckle do this matte Supreme NATO, which are excellent. I think it suits the watch rather well, and I thought this would be a fitting watch to wear today, given the watch that we're going to be talking about. Maybe, I don't know. Gabe, first of all, congratulations. You launched, as you mentioned, this is your fifth release here with IWC. Maybe you can kind of give us a brief overview of the watch itself and what the kind of inspiration was behind this watch.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so the watch, not unlike your 3706, which I have as well, and I had a feeling you might be wearing yours. I didn't wear mine. It's a pilot's chronograph watch. It's 41 millimeters, so it's in the new case size that IWC released this year around watches and wonders. It's got a matte black dial, gray numerals and markers on the dial. The lume, although it's applied, it's like a gray lume. What's really cool is it glows white, which is really interesting. I think it's the first time IWC has used white glowing lume on a watch. And then it has just like a bunch of little details that are sort of like catnip for collectors or fans of IWC, which we are. So it's got a German language day wheel. And then on the back, it has a display case back, just like the other 41 millimeter pilot chronographs do. But this one has a black rotor, so it just kind of accentuates the movement a bit more. And that was actually the starting point, or the inspiration for this watch, was actually what's inside the watch. And that's actually the reason we chose to do something that was very monochromatic on the dial. It's almost an invitation to turn the watch over and check out the movement. And the reason why is because one of my favorite watches is the IWC first pilot's chronograph, the 3706 stainless steel version. This is a watch I actually discovered when I was visiting IWC. I was at in Schaffhausen visiting the museum, and I ran into another guy there. He didn't work at IWC. And he was wearing that watch, and I had never seen it before. This is what's so amazing about like this hobby, is like we're constantly getting, just when we thought we had seen it all, we learned something new, right? And so I came across this reference I had no idea existed. And this was only a couple of years ago. I asked him if I could see the watch, and it's like a 39 millimeter automatic chronograph, classic IWC pilot watch design, very clean and stark. But the thing that got me is he had his watch on the bracelet. So it's that classic pilot's like brick road bracelet. But what's amazing is his watch was probably 20 years old, and you open it up and it's got a milled clasp, and then the clasp has perlage. So the clasp, the inside of the clasp is decorated. And that just blew my mind. And if you think about how other brands that are competitors with IWC were approaching bracelets 20 or more years ago. And so this watch, the 3706, was probably first made in the mid to late 1990s. It has a fully milled clasp. It has this amazing bracelet with this quick change system to remove links. So you don't need a screwdriver or pin system. You can basically just pop out these little buttons and change the links. This was way ahead of its time. And at this point, Rolex was still using stamped clasps.
Stamped clasp, hollow end links, even.
All that stuff. And believe me, I love that era of Rolex too. And I love the rattly bracelets and things like that. But you have to give a hat tip to IWC for the level at which they were executing years ago. And what's really interesting when you research this watch online in the forums, so much discussion about the 3706 was what IWC was doing to modify the movement. And it turns out that, unlike the way a lot of brands approach movements today, so it's a Valjoux 7750 in the 3706. But IWC didn't receive them as assembled movements. They received them as kits, meaning essentially ETA, who owns Valjoux, was sending them all of the components. And then what IWC would do is apply additional finishing, assembly, and also change some parts. So like the rotor bearing is proprietary to IWC. That was something they changed in-house. And so a lot of the speculation on the forums about that original pilot's chronograph was about what couldn't be seen within the watch, the extent to which IWC was modifying the movement to make it more robust, more accurate, and even to decorate and finish it. But of course, that movement was hidden not only behind a solid case back, but a soft iron cage. And so now that IWC does their watchmaking in-house, we're like, we want to focus on that and celebrate that. Let's tell the story of the pilot's chronograph from the inside out. And so we focused on the case back where you can see the movement, accentuating with the rotor, and then designing the watch in such a way that it begs you to flip the watch over and see what's going on inside. So it's very much inspired by the approach to watchmaking from back in the day, and also has a bunch of just little flourishes that, like I said, as fans of the brand, the German day wheel is catnip for us. The matte dial we love, the rotor. These are all just little details where you have a watch that looks like a quintessential IWC watch, but as you grow with the watch and spend time with it, there's further details to just enjoy and dig into.
Yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned the kind of small details, and I know that's something that you guys have. You've taken a very considered approach in some of your past releases as well. The Zenith immediately jumps to mind, which was kind of very kind of monochromatic. Almost so you didn't even notice, but the date window at 4:30 was gone. Things that I think. You really gotta I hate to say that, but to know, like what kind of makes it special, interesting. And I think that this IWC was interesting because it kind of, when I first looked at it, it was kind of just like of course moment. It wasn't like, this is some crazy exotic, strange thing that they've done. And when brands do that, I've got no problem. There's some cool stuff happening there. But I think this kind of really pulls the watch back into some of its roots, which you kind of alluded to there. Zach Kazan did a throwback review of the 3706, and I think he talked to this a little bit in comparing it to some of the Pilot's watches that are on offer from them now, which are all lovely watches, of course. But this collaboration seems to kind of pull it back into this territory. Zach Kazan, is that the impression that you got as well?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk, Gabe, about the connection between this watch and the 3706. I love the 3706. I reviewed the watch that Blake currently has on his wrist for the site. Big fan of that watch, and especially the proportions of it and the size of it. And it really is kind of an artifact of just another era in watchmaking, really, before everyone became obsessed with in-house movements. And I love your point about IWC taking these off-the-shelf movements and doing something kind of like uniquely IWC with them. I believe they use their own balance springs and other components, in that movement to tweak it to their specifications. And there was a time when we could look at that, as a watch community, and see like the craft in doing that. And I think now, our perspective is shifted because of the focus on in-house movements over the course of the last 10 years. So I like that you're, that you acknowledge that period in IWC's history. I think is great.
Yeah. And I also just wanted to like add into there, or at least kind of get your take on anything that you like, the process of getting to where you were. If did you kind of outlay all of this with IWC and they said, well, this is possible, this isn't? Did you have a vision that was kind of like here that it had to be compromised, or what was that process like?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And every collaboration we approach, we start with an idea and a creative concept. And then all of the decisions we make about the watch, we evaluate against the creative concept. So in truth, where we started with this piece, the creative concept we started with and we pitched IWC on was Spitfire Inside Out. And we were planning to do this not because we didn't know that IWC was going to be releasing a 41 millimeter version of the standard pilot's chronograph. We assumed that if we wanted to do something in the 41-ish millimeter size, we would need to be working with the Spitfire chronograph. And so we approached them with this idea of the Spitfire from Inside Out, very much inspired by what we loved about the 3706, and really doing something to pay that off. And as we went through the process and we learned more, we learned from IWC, well, actually they're planning a 41 millimeter pilot's chronograph. Okay, so now let's think about that and work with that. And I think where we went with it was we tried to think about how this would sit within the rest of that 41 millimeter pilot's chronograph family. So you have a blue dial version and you have a green dial version. They're beautiful. The dials catch and reflect light and are finished in an absolutely beautiful way. But what they don't have is something that we loved about the Spitfire and we loved about the 3706. It's just like a core black dial with a matte dial, super toolish, super rugged. And so that was where we kind of focused our efforts. It was like, let's make something that complements the current collection, but also doesn't feel like it sits entirely outside of the collection. Let's stay true to IWC. So we then focused ourselves by saying, okay, what are we trying to do here? And where we landed was like, what we're trying to do is make a watch almost as if, like imagine we had a time machine. We went back in time and we kidnapped the watchmaking and design team from IWC in the 1990s and brought them back to modern day. What would they be making with the resources available to them today at IWC? And so how do we keep the spirit of that era and what we love about those watches, the 3706 in particular, and bring it into a modern context? And so what that meant was we had to make a lot of choices around restraint. One of the challenges when you're doing a collaborative piece, especially for us, is like, we want every piece to be different than what we've done before. We want it to be better or more special or whatever. So there's sometimes this inclination to throw the kitchen sink at it. And if I'm to be totally honest, like one of the things we looked at was like, what if we did Ceratanium pushers or Ceratanium pusher collars? What if we remove the dial, remove the logo from the dial, which they quickly said no to. But we had an inclination in the process to try to do too much. And I think fortunately, we at sort of the end of the design process, we stepped back and we said, you know what, less, with IWC in particular, less is more. That's part of what's so appealing about the pilot's watch in general, is it's like, it's clean, it's stark. It resonates with people in this very kind of visceral way because of its simplicity. And so I think the biggest choices we made in terms of the details around design with IWC were the decisions we made to remove things and leave things out and exercise a bit of restraint. And that's tough for us because some of the other watches we've done are a bit nuts. Like the past watch we did with Urwerk was almost the opposite, right? Not that we just threw the kitchen sink at it, but that had a creative concept around bringing to life the gauges. And you guys have talked about this piece, the gauges of the space shuttle. Mm-hmm. And so we were able with that watch to add a lot of detail to the dial and add a lot of story to the dial and the layout and the complications of time on that watch. And so coming off of that project and working with IWC, we sort of had to change gears and focus on sort of this notion of less is more. And that's harder, quite frankly, than the inclination to throw everything at a collaboration, which you're right, sometimes works great. One of my favorite collaborations from this year was what you guys did with Zodiac. Yeah. That's not to say you threw the kitchen sink at that watch, but the decisions around design were likewise intentional. There's a lot going on in that watch, but it's borrowing from a time period and a design language where that was the language of designs. It's, I think, long way of saying the most important thing we do in collaborating with watch brands is we hold ourselves to a creative concept. And so every decision we make along the way, we are able to evaluate against that creative concept and ask ourselves, is it helping the creative concept or is it hurting the creative concept? And sometimes that means adding, sometimes that means subtracting, which is how we got to where we are.
Sure.
On this one.
And I know the work, I mean, there's a narrative there and it kind of tells a story that you kind of discover the more that you look at the watch. And I think with the Zodiac, it's kind of the same way. And likewise, I think with the IWC, it kind of, like there's a lot more to learn and take in than meets the eye with that watch, which I certainly appreciate. And I think that was the same with the Zenith, and it seems to be kind of a theme that is pulled through with a lot of your creations. I know you've worked with Moser and Joshua Shapiro, all people that we've got a great amount of respect for around here. So, boy, looking back, having just said that, you said you created Collective, what, 3 years ago? 4 years ago?
Yeah, we started it in 2018, and that's when we started just basically trying to get our first collaborative watch projects off the board. And the first one was with Zenith. So we started that process in 2018, and then the first watch launched in 2019. So 2 years ago. Yeah. Which is crazy. I mean, to think that we've been fortunate enough to do 5 watches in that time is mind blowing to me.
With some top tier brands.
That's what I was just going to say.
Impressive, like pretty impressive roster of brands, and diverse too. You've got independent brands, Moser, obviously Shapiro, and also like these big, like historic brands like Zenith and IWC.
Yeah. What a roster! You guys must be really proud of that. But one thing I wanted to say, or at least ask you about the IWC, where's the squared off hands ever on the table with this watch?
Oh man. I'm the sucker for those squared off hands, man. That's one of the details I love about the 3706. And to be honest, it was something we talked about very early on. At least between me and Asher. But once we began working with IWC, I don't think it was on the table, because I think, we think about that notion of what would we be doing if we, kidnapped the design and watchmaking team at IWC from the 1990s and brought them into the present. Well, they'd probably be using the current sword hands. They probably wouldn't be using that. That's more the language of IWC now. And so it wasn't something we actually looked at or thought of. We just kind of rolled with kind of the current base model, the current base design, and asked ourselves, what would we do within that to kind of strip it back a little bit and bring forward that spirit. But man, I love those squared off hands. What a look.
Yeah, they're great. We had Chris Granger on a little while back, and we kind of pressed him on that as well. But I like Chris a lot. He's a guy that really seems to kind of get it, and I like how he thinks about the brand. And I look forward to kind of seeing what they do in the coming years here, particularly in their other kind of sport watches outside of the Pilot's range. The Aquatimers and the Ingenieur in particular, like what a fascinating history that has too. So hopefully that brand is in good hands there. But yeah, getting back to, boy, how did you guys manage this? So you guys clearly, you just didn't like enter onto the scene. You've been around watches and around the watch industry, or collecting watches at least for some time. I mean, to just come out of the gates and start working with the caliber of brands that you were able to. So how did you get into this space in general, to that kind of prominence?
Yeah, well, it was a long journey. Asher and I, we it's funny, we met in the seventh grade. So we grew up in New York City, and we met in first day of school in homeroom in seventh grade.
Oh, nice.
And we've shared a lot of hobbies together over the year. In fact, the first business either of us started was when we were in seventh grade. We were both lowly computer nerds, and so we started like a computer repair business.
Oh, nice.
So we've been sharing hobbies together, and even working together for a long period of time. And when we went off to college, and then graduated, and then we're living and working in separate cities and things like that. Those hobbies were the things that actually kept us connected to one another. So music was a big one, and watches was the other big one. And I think we both kind of got serious about it, and we're sort of feeding each other's passion about this long distance. Probably about 15 years ago is when it started to get out of control. We can all identify the time where it started to get a little bit out of hand. And so we have totally different taste in watches. My taste in what I am interested in probably aligns most with what you guys cover. I'd say like my sweet spot, if we're talking podcasts here, would be some combination of the Gray NATO and Worn and Wound podcast. That's
Sure.
the world I orbit in.
Yeah.
And this Damasco is a great example of that. Asher's taste is very much an independent watchmaking and crazy and weird stuff, which is great. And he loves to wear dress watches. I never wear a dress watch. I only own one.
Yeah.
And so we were able to, over time, sort of help each other explore the watch world and push one another in our taste. And our first introduction to Zenith was through Rob Kaplan at Topper Jewelers. And that was sort of how we made our first overture to Zenith. We had known Rob because we were living and collecting watches in the Bay Area, and Topper is kind of a hub for that, certainly among retailers. And so we knew Rob. We also just knew a lot of people in the watch world through the store. And we talked to Rob about this idea we had, which was building a watch collectors group around collaborations. And we wanted to get his thought on who might be a good partner, who would be willing to take a risk or take a flyer on us. And he very wisely steered us towards Zenith. He thought there'd be an opportunity to do something interesting with them. And honestly, Zenith, even just 3 years ago, was in a really different spot than where they are today. Yeah. They had just gone over the last 3 years, and Zach Kazan, I know you're a Zenith fan, yeah. But they've really gone just from strength to strength. And I think we were just lucky that, one, they took a flyer on us, and two, we happened to jump on board with them, or they took that risk with us before they got super hot. And I don't think they would have today. But when you look at their production watches and even the other limited editions and collaborations they've done over the last 2 years, I mean, it's like, the 1928 Yankees. It's pretty impressive. They've done some really wild stuff. I think they found their voice as a brand. So every time we launch a watch, we call up the team at Zenith. And it's like this rite of passage with every watch we launch. We call the team at Zenith who believed in us and championed the project internally to thank them. It just wouldn't have happened without them, and frankly without Rob.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really cool story. So maybe that watch was the turning point for Zenith. So. Is there?
No, it definitely wasn't. It was dumb luck on our part.
Is there? I'm trying to think, and I might be wrong. One of you probably know better than I would. Is there a way to get a Zenith, an El Primero movement without a date on there? Well, that's not a Rolex, I guess. From Zenith, did they make one?
Oh gosh, yeah, that was one of that's a great example of the creative brief of the project really informing the decision. So in the design process for that watch, it was a 38 millimeter El Primero Chronomaster, monochromatic white and gray sort of dial. And the creative concept for that watch was, since we started Collective in Silicon Valley, was like, what would be the sort of Silicon Valley take on a Chronomaster? What would be the sort of, if we were to apply the product design language of Silicon Valley to a Chronomaster, what would it look like? And so that was the brief that guided the decision making. And initially, Zenith came to us with a watch with a date on it. And we asked them if they could remove it, and they were very resistant because they don't, at least at that time, they didn't. I still don't think they do make a 38 millimeter Chronomaster without a date. And they'd been asked, I think, so little scuttlebutt here. I think they had been asked by Hodinkee on the collab they had done that year to remove the date, and they said no.
Wow.
And they said yes in our case. I have still pinched myself. They said yes in our case because they agreed that it made, we worked with their product design team. We worked with people who are watch designers who are passionate about design. And they agreed that given the creative concept and the idea behind the watch, removing the date made sense. And so I think it's one of the only 38 millimeter Chronomasters you can find without a date, which is also really cool. I have no bias. No date, 4:30, 6, 3 o'clock date window position.
You don't have a date. You don't have a take on the 4:30 date. You're the only person in the watch community that doesn't have a take on the 4:30 date window.
One of my favorite applications or uses of a date is a 4:30 date. It's the way Bell and Ross does it.
Yeah.
I think
they do it really well with that really small circular date window too.
That's how everyone should do. So when people are like, no 4:30 dates, down with the 4:30 date. I think Bell and Ross it's one of the best designed date windows there is, no matter where it is on the dial. It really works. It's very elegant. So I am date window agnostic.
Yeah. I think that's largely where Zach and I kind of fall on it too.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think, but without fail, every time we put something on a Zenith on the site, the comments, what's with the date window at 4:30? Like, well,
I mean, to be fair, people comment about the date window wherever it is.
No matter what.
It's just like there's a certain type of vitriolic response that comes with the 4:30 date window, which I personally don't think is fair. I think it's like it's iconic to the El Primero, and I think if it works anywhere, it works on that watch.
Yeah, weren't you guys talking about this and maybe it was Zach Weiss who said it, like, if you don't put it at 4:30 on that watch, where do you put it? I agree. I think there's great point.
Like, you could put it down at 6 and like cut into the register down there, but I think that's less elegant. And I think when brands do that, there's something about it. I don't know. It just doesn't feel quite like I'm fine. I think they just own it. You just own it at 4:30, and that's what it is. You just like lean into it, and that's just part of the design of the watch. So I think that's fine. Gabe, I'm glad that you mentioned the kind of what steers your collecting these days and your interests. I think you texted me or emailed me the other week about a watch that you had just picked up, the Fair, the Monopusher chronograph. What are your impressions on that one after owning it for a little bit?
Oh my gosh. Fair, another brand I was turned on to by Worn and Wound. First saw them at Wind Up. I've been really smitten with Fair from a while, from the perspective that their thing is like, they're all about design and kind of this quirky, fun British design. That's their thing. And their watches are Swiss made, and they don't hide that. They're very transparent about that, which I like, but they have a very distinct design language, which I really admire. Like, they're not afraid of like taking a risk and sort of marching to the beat of their own drummer, and you don't have to like it. They have a lot of fun with color. They have a lot of fun with other kind of design cues, and I just think it's like really brave and bold to have a point of view like that, especially when a lot of watches tread around the same territory. So hat tip to Fair on that. They certainly caught my eye. But because their designs are so distinctive, I've always kind of been waiting for like the one for me. And the instant I saw that the Seagrave Monopusher chronograph, I was like, that is the Fair I have been waiting for. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really know what to expect in terms of quality and fit and finish, and that was what blew me away. Two things blew me away upon getting that watch. The first was the level of quality and fit and finish of of the watch. I believe it's like about a $1,900 US dollar watch, whatever the currency conversion works out to.
Yeah.
And man, does that thing hold up to competitors and price segments well above it.
Yeah.
It's just a very well made watch, very well finished watch. The dial furniture is like sterling, and the movement finishing, they're using an elaborate grade movement from Sellita, but they also finish it with a really beautiful blue rotor. And there's just a quality to that watch that I wasn't quite expecting, and I was blown away by. The other thing I was blown away by is the fact that the watch is not only a strap monster in that no matter what strap you put on it, it looks great, but it's like a strap chameleon. It changes character, like the watch changes character based on which strap you have it on. So if you have it on a leather versus traditional leather versus a rally strap versus NATO, it almost feels like a new watch, which is really hard to explain. I've never experienced something quite like that. There's certainly watches that wear great on any number of straps, but this one, it's like tofu. It just takes on the flavor of whatever's around it.
Yeah, I like that. No, I love that watch too. I think they really nailed it. I feel like, especially in the last year, they've really kind of they've matured quite a bit in their design language, which I love. It's a big shout out to Paul over there at Fair. So what else, is there anything else that you pay attention to, kind of in the small independent scene, or what kind of catches your eye these days, or that you're chasing?
Yeah, there's a few things that have caught my eye, and I don't know if you guys have discussed it or plan to discuss it, but one thing is the new Speedmaster chronographs that came out. I think they're called the Chronoscope.
Yeah.
I know you guys covered it on the site. I'm not sure if you're planning to chat about it here, but so I don't want to scoop you, but I don't know what I think about that watch, and that's actually one where everyone I talk to has a different take on it, and I'm actually abstaining from any kind of take on it because I'm trying to absorb it and wrap my head around it. So I'm kind of curious from your perspective how you guys see that watch and what your perspective is. It's
funny that you say that, actually. So as we record this tomorrow, the podcast that comes out, we spend a bit of time talking about it. Right. I kind of felt on the same way, and to me, I'd be curious about the case because I know it's labeled as 43, and I know the Speedmasters that we all have are labeled as 42, but they don't really wear a 42 millimeter watch. Or they're much easier on the wrist. So I'm curious, again, it looks very similar to that. Is there's just a different bezel assembly on it that's making the measurement go up like that? I don't know. But overall, I think it's interesting. I think where we ended up on it was it feels a little like a mishmash of styles, right? Because with the kind of 40s inspired dial and the kind of modernish looking bracelet, because the bracelet looks very similar to the one that just launched on the 3861 earlier this year. In that case, I don't know. I feel like this is, and then especially with all of the different colorways and dial configurations and all that kind of stuff, it's hard to land on. Maybe this is one you just need to see in the flesh. Zach, I think you had a good take on it too, though, right?
My take is that it's similar to, it sounds like we're all kind of all on the same page. It's just, it's a weird mishmash of, different kind of iconic, design languages from different decades, the mixing of the 1940s and the 1960s, it just doesn't really come together for me. I do love that style of chronograph in a vintage watch, those kind of those multi-scale dials I think are very cool, and they're historic, and there's lots of cool references that you can explore in the realm of vintage watches. But those watches were always 36, 37 millimeters, when they were being produced in the 1930s and 1940s. And it just feels kind of strange to see that on a big giant Speedmaster with the very familiar Speedmaster case, even though it's a little bit, I agree, but it's probably not a discernible difference between 43 and 42. So yeah, it's I haven't seen it in person. I'd be curious to get my hands on one to to see if I'm wrong on my initial impression there, but it doesn't really come together for me as on first impression.
I'll tell you what I'm most keen about this this watch though, or the part of it that I like the most is the movement that they put into there. It's a hand-wound movement, and it's got that like huge 3/4 plate that kind of covers up most of it. And I feel like it's a bit thinner too. I'd be interested to see if they use this in some of their future like Dark Side of the Moon style releases, because I feel like they released some really cool Speedmasters that are like frankly a little large for my wrist and a little like chunky. If they started using those movements and sizing some of those down, I think that they'd really be onto something with those there. But an interesting watch, right? Nonetheless.
Yeah, there's a lot to take in with that one, and I think I'm with you guys on like it's probably one of those things that needs to be experienced in person. So hopefully go hands-on. The one that I felt like was a no-brainer was the bronze gold version.
That's the best one, I think, for sure.
Yeah,
it's just like, oh yeah, right, of course. Because it feels maybe a little bit less like a mishmash because it's on a brown leather strap. But yeah, I think you're right. Like the unsung hero of this is that movement and where they can take it next and where it will go.
Yeah. So you guys have worked with some pretty awesome brands. Do you pay attention to other collaborative efforts that are out there? I know as we're talking just a little bit ago, a new Hodinkee collaboration with Hermes was released. Other companies, small companies like Messina Lab have been doing some pretty cool collaborations. Do you pay attention to this kind of stuff? And do you get excited about it? Do you feel like, oh, we're like playing in this space as well? Like we got to up our game, or what's your take on everybody else doing this kind of thing?
Yeah. Okay. Well, for sure, we pay attention to it. Really, mostly just because we're watch fans. We're continually checking like every watch blog and refreshing Watchville and doing just out of pure fandom.
Mm-hmm.
So of course we see all that stuff and we think about it and it's good. I think we spend so much time talking and thinking about this stuff that it's gotten like a bit esoteric for us, and so we think of this space as like this 3-part Venn diagram, and we try to play in the middle of it. So one aspect of this 3-part Venn diagram are limited edition watches. Another aspect of this Venn diagram are collaborative watches, so watches that are done as collaborations. And then the final sort of circle in the Venn diagram is concept watches. And I think what we've seen is like in the world of collaborative watches or limited edition watches in general, not every watch checks all of those boxes or overlaps, right? So there are plenty of examples of watches that are a collaboration, and I think some of the Hodinkee watches. This is no real knock on Hodinkee. I'm just going to use this example. Some of the watches they've done, I think, are limited edition watches more than they are collaborative watches. And there are some watches they do that are collaborative. But I think not fully understanding maybe the process that went into the Hermes or the Oris they did most recently. Those strike me more as like it's a limited edition watch. There are certain things about it, but I don't really see it as a collaborative thing because I don't necessarily see the hands of Hodinkee on the watch. When I think about like what you guys did say with Laurier, like the Gemini collab, or with Zodiac, those to me, like those are collaborative watches because I see the fingerprints of Worn and Wound on them. Like being a fan of the site and the podcast and knowing Zach Weiss, I know like those watches don't exist without Zach Weiss. Like I see his hand in that, and it's very clear how the partnership between Worn and Wound and say like Zodiac took Zodiac in a direction they wouldn't have gone on their own, right? So to me, that's a collaborative watch. And then there are like concept watches, and these are watches designed around an idea. And so one of my favorite examples of a concept watch is an Hublot. It's the Concrete Jungle watch.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So this is a watch that's a tribute to New York City, and the case and the dial are made of a concrete composite, which is mind blowing. But like talk about cool material innovation, like that's really cool, but it's not this, material innovation for the sake of material innovation. There's an idea behind that watch. They're using concrete, not just for shock value, but to tell a story and produce a watch where you look at it and you're like, oh, right, that's New York City. And so what we're trying to do, we don't do it with every project we have, is try to bring all those pieces together. So yes, do something that's limited, because that's just the way it's got to be. We're not making production watches. Do something where it's a collaboration, where you can see our fingerprints on it just as much as the brand, and then do something that has an idea. And so that's where we try to play. And that's not to say we're the only people who do that, or that we do that every time, but that's what we're striving for. And so I think there's just like so much to talk about in the world of collaborative watches, which is great.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like the take, or the space we're trying to carve out.
Yeah, it's a very active space right now for sure. But I like this feels a little different because it kind of feels like it's like of the community, by the community, for the community type of thing, right? Because you're like literally supporting the process of this happening by being a member, and it's like kind of a part. It's like a condition of being a member that you're supporting this happening, which kind of makes you guys a little different. Do you ever get feedback from the community of members on this stuff? Like, hey, we're kind of at a crossroads here. We're thinking this, or this, and you guys are on the line to buy it. What do you think? Or is it kind of like you just bring them in when the time is right?
Yeah, it's a good question, and we're always changing and evolving. I think, one of the good things about producing watches for a group of people who we're in contact with is it creates some accountability. When the watch is sold, we can't walk away from them, right?
Yeah.
They know where we live. And so there's a couple things that go on. One is the group itself is this like ongoing feedback and listening experience for us, where we're kind of aware of what people's tastes are, what they're curious about, what brands they're getting interested in or learning about. And that, of course, is, guiding us in terms of, when we think about which brands might be interesting or what might be interesting from a watchmaking standpoint. So that's certainly happening. And then, yeah, we get very open, and we try to solicit very open feedback from members. And so one of the things we used to do was we would make the announcement of our watches a surprise. Like, we wouldn't tell the members who the next collaboration was with, or what the watch was, or anything like that. And we would unveil it in this big surprise, not because we wanted to keep information from people, but because we thought like that was the most fun. And we got feedback that like, actually, people don't necessarily want to design the watch. I think a lot of people recognize that, we have 85 people in collective right now, and if 85 people designed a watch, who knows what we would end up with.
Yeah.
It's like a camel is a horse designed by committee kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And two, there's just a lot of work that goes into these projects, as you guys know from doing your own collaborative pieces. There's meetings, and we have to like carry insurance to work with some of the watchmakers we do. There's like a business of it that can be kind of a grind. And so members basically recognize, like, I think on the whole, they don't want to necessarily design the watch, but they want to be along for the ride. So now we're much more transparent about what we do, and that's helpful. So for instance, we shared the details of the IWC watch with members way before it was ever announced publicly, months before. And by the way, under duress from the members, they twisted our arms to make us tell them, but even before, when we were planning to. And, there's some good feedback that came from it. One of the questions, for instance, we got was like about strap lengths. And people wanting to know like what strap lengths would be available. And that was I'm glad we got that question and that feedback early on in the process, because it made us accountable to go figure that out. So then we went to IWC and we figured out like what we're going to do about straps for people with larger wrists. Had we not gotten that feedback or that question early, we would have launched a watch with a strap that didn't work for maybe a lot of people who were interested in it. And that would be a bummer. So I think we're always trying to find the balance between how much of the design and the process is collaborative versus how much of it needs to be kind of creative directed and organized more with like a singular vision.
Sure. So how many of these IWCs are you making? And if listeners are interested, how can they go about getting one?
Yeah, so we're making 125 of them, and they're going to be available through collectivehorology.com. So if you go to our website, you can check out the watch. You can learn all about the details of the watch. And then if you're interested in purchasing the watch and joining Collective, you fill out a simple application on our site. All this stuff is clearly linked. The purpose of the application isn't to exclude people. It's just to make sure that people who raise their hand are really interested in being a part of Collective, as well as owning the watch itself. It's 4 simple questions. It doesn't require a whole essay or anything like that. We don't judge by the length of the answers. We don't judge by what watches are in your collection. In fact, we don't ask anyone what watches they own. We don't care. We just want to make sure you've got good intentions and that you're just as eager about the idea of joining a community of other collectors as you are about the watch itself. Those applications then get reviewed every day by our membership committee, which is comprised of Collective members. And then we send out invitations to join and purchase the watch for the people we admit. So we try to make it as painless as possible. And the intention is really to, one, make sure we have a fair way for everyone to apply. We don't want to put the watches on sale and have them disappear in a matter of minutes. We want to make sure that everyone who's really considering this and wants to join can be evaluated in the same fair way. And right now, an application is the only fair way to do it. Maybe we'll change that going forward. And then 2, we just want to make sure we have as diverse a group as possible. So we don't admit new members necessarily through referrals or things like that. We don't want this to be about cronyism. We want everyone to be on the same playing field so that we can make sure we're not biased and we're welcoming in as many possible people with different interests and collections from around the world. This release, we're going from 50 was our last major release last year with Moser, up to 125, because we are opening a new member hub, as I mentioned, in the UK. And so that's really focused on members, not just in the UK, but in Europe more broadly. Yeah. The purpose of the hub will mean that we can have a critical mass of members in that part of the world where we can organize and program specifically for them. So don't think of this as a Silicon Valley thing. Don't think of this as an American thing. It really is a global thing. And so we want to encourage people, particularly from the UK and Europe, to apply. If you're interested, we'd love to have you.
All right. Well, yeah, collectivehorology.com. Congratulations on the release again. And final question, dream brand. You can work with any watch brand you want, design whatever you want. Who are you going for?
Oh, well, it's funny. When we started this, we used to think about dream brands in terms of like the brands we loved just as collectors, right? Yeah. And now we think about it a little bit differently, where we're looking for brands who we learned it's about the people, not necessarily the brand or the watches. And so we're looking for brands of people within brands who are open to collaboration, creativity, and risk-taking. And so in that spirit, one of the watches I mentioned today that maybe sounded like a little bit out of left field was that Hublot. But Hublot is a brand I would love to work with from the perspective that they march to the beat of their own drummer. Mm-hmm. They take a lot of creative risks. They create pieces that are conceptual and collaborative in nature. And they do a lot of really interesting things around materials innovation, the concrete watch just being one of those things. So that is a brand I would love to work with, which I honestly probably wouldn't have put on that list years ago when we started this endeavor.
Yeah. Well, very cool. I give you points for creativity and thinking outside of the box there. I would love to see what that kind of a collaboration would look like. Yeah. So, well, Gabe, on that note, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. It's been a huge pleasure having you here.
Guys, thank you. This is an honor and a real treat. So thank you.
All right. Well, best of luck on your growth. Again, collectivehorology.com. Go check them out. And until next time, thanks for listening.